Hello and welcome to a new Google Sheets video in Practical Sheets. Today we are going to create a web app that allows us to schedule appointments. We've done these in the past using Google Forms, but you'll see that even though it's a bit more complex to create it because we're going to need some programming skills, JavaScript, HTML, and Google Apps Script, at the end we will have much more flexibility with the things we can do because it's basically JavaScript, and this will allow a lot of things to be done just as in a web application in the real world. So we're going to do the skeleton, this basic structure of the web app that we can then in other videos update and optimize. But for now, we're going to create this form in this video where we can put an email address, whichever, and then select a form. We're going to create this dropdown, everything from scratch, of course, and this date dropdown, so we can select a date. Let's select May 2nd, and then we click submit. And if we go to our Google Sheets, you can see that automatically May 2nd, the course and the email is registered as if we had done it in Google Forms. But again, this is the first step on a much more flexible system that then we can connect with Google Calendar if you like, with the emails, and we could customize the boundaries, the dates we want to block, and we can add much more things to the form if you would like also. So I know you're going to like it, but before we begin, let me invite you to the Patreon page where you can download this template and more than 100 templates from the videos in the channel, and you can ask me anything specific about the code if you would like. Thank you so much to my Patreons. So let's begin, as always, from scratch. We're going to create a new Google Sheet. You could do this without a Google Sheet. You could do the web app directly from a Google Apps Script file, but I prefer to do it from a Google Sheet to keep it tight with the database and to make it easier to share with the Patreons or students or whatever. So let's do sheets.new. What I want to do here in this first draft is a very simple scheduling app. For now, I'm not going to have a lot of available hours and all that. I'm just going to have a space for the name, a space for the class, maybe a specific class, or interest, or the topic, or whatever. And finally, the date. That's it. Very similar to what we did in the system of scheduling with Google Forms. We're going to try to replicate that. And then in a second or third lesson, we could try to make it better and have the availabilities and all that. So here you could fill it out manually with your name, the class. We could have a data validation for date and all that. But we're going to use a web app. This is the nice thing about this. So we're going to extension AppScript. A web app is basically an HTML that I'm showing through a web page. That's it. And then this web page, I can embed it in my web page or share it via WhatsApp or in my social media or whatever to my customers to make it easy to schedule an appointment or a class or whatever. So for a web app, the first thing we're going to need is a doGet function. Inside of this doGet function, we're going to have an HTML object. This HTML object, we're going to create it with the HTML service. And we could do it one of two ways, via an HTML output or via an HTML template. Let's do it for now with an output. And why from file? Because it's easier. Instead of trying to get all the HTML inside of these parentheses, it's easy to put just the name of the HTML. Let's say it's going to be called main. You could put the name you want. And we're going to create here in the plus button, we're going to choose HTML. And then here, we're going to give the same name that I wrote here, main in this case. And we're going to create an HTML. For now, if you are not very familiar with HTML, it's a language that works with tags. So we're going to create a title tag that says my scheduling form. And then we can change to whatever you want. And the nice thing of having in HTML is that you can customize it however you want, with images, with colors. This is why we're going to use a framework, but more on that later. For now, I need the base function, the basic web app to work. So for this, we're going to basically just return the HTML. And that's it. I think here I have to give it, I think this should work. With this, I don't need to do anything else for the most simple of apps. Let's save. For this to work, I need to deploy it. So we're going to this big blue button that says deploy, and we're going to select new deployment. And here in the enable deployment types, we're going to choose web app. And here we're going to put a name to our web app, say scheduling web app, or whatever you like. For now, we're going to leave it as it is, execute as, and who has access, only myself, because we're going to do tests. But later, we are going to choose one of these two. Okay, for now, let's leave it as it is, and let's deploy. We're going to click on this URL. We can copy it or just click so we can open it in a new tab. And here we have it. When we are doing tests and doing development and changing a lot of things very quickly, like in this video, or when you are just starting to build it, we are going to need an additional thing. So for now, let's say we change here in my scheduling form version 2, and we save and we refresh here, and you say, hey, why I'm not seeing the version 2 here? You would need to deploy it again and have version 2, version 3, version 4. So in order to not have to do 100 different versions, we're going to use this test deployment option. So we click here, and instead of using this URL that finishes on exec, we're going to use here in our tests this one that is the same URL but finishes not in exec but in dev, so that every change I just save here and then I refresh here and I'm going to see it. And finally, when we are ready, when we have a version we like, we're going to deploy it again and use it. Perfect. So now that we are sure that this works, we can start putting our font. So for example, here, my scheduling, I missed a C. So it's as easy as changing it here by a C, saving, and then updating here. This blue square, there are several ways of changing it, of removing it. Maybe we can see this in another video. For now, I'm going to focus on the form. So we go to Bootstrap. This is a framework that enables us to use predefined formats for web pages, and we don't have to do it from scratch. So for this, the only thing we need is to paste. We could go, if you want, we can go to here, this step 2 in the getting started section of Bootstrap. As you could see, I just clicked Bootstrap in Google, the first link that appeared, and then I went to quick start, introduction, and what I'm going to need is this. So I could copy all of this if you want. The script is not that necessary, but doesn't do any harm. So we're going to replace all of this with that. And now we have this hello world. So now this should change to hello world, and you are going to see a slight change in format when I update. Just by changing the font, I know that Bootstrap is working. So the first thing we're going to do in Bootstrap is to work with something called containers. So we're just going to create a div. If you're not familiar with HTML, a div is like a general section or container. And here, in each tag, we could use some attributes. This is called a class. So we are going to use classes that work within Bootstrap. So if you, for any reason, are not working with Bootstrap, this may not work. So I'm just going to write container here, and then I'm going to close. It's very important. In the most of the tags in HTML need to be closed, and this, in the div case, for example, this indicates the HTML until where does my div go. So I'm going to place it below the h1, so that for now the only thing inside my div one will be h1. But now we're going to include a form. This is the next step. Let's save it. And again, you'll notice a very slight change, basically in the margins. That's it. That is how you know that the container is working. And frankly, it looks better. So now we're going to create a form. So again, we could go to Bootstrap and look. The Bootstrap is a really nice framework, not only because you save time coding, but because there's a lot of help and documentation online. This is why I like it. So we're going to look for forms here. You could see the forms, and we can go to the overview, and we could start with something like this. Then we're going to change it because we need the date and all that. But to begin, like a basic framework of the HTML, we can start with this. We're going to copy this to the clipboard, the HTML, and paste it below the H1 inside my div. Sometimes when you paste it, it goes to the left, and it's nice to right click and click in format documents so that the spaces give us a better idea of the hierarchy. What do I mean? First, you have the body. Inside the body, you have the div container. Inside the div container, you have two elements, the H1 that is the title and the form. Inside the form, you have one div, and inside the div, you have other things and so on and so forth. You have HTML works like this. Tags nested inside tags, nested inside tags, and you could have 10, 20 different levels. If I save this and update, now you can see a nice form, very similar to what we see in the Bootstrap. Okay, but this doesn't work for our current project, so we're going to change it a bit. I'm going to remove everything, just leave this email address here. I said this was the name. Maybe we could change it for email so we could have it the same. So we're going to remove everything else than this div inside my form. This div, this other div at the bottom, I'm going to leave it. So let's delete it. And we could leave everything as it is, except I could change this text. I don't need this text. So I'm going to remove this div. I'm going to remove this help. It's not necessary. And very important, most important thing here is the ID. So we may change this ID, for example, to user email, for example. And here in the label, we're also change it for user email. It's very important that the label and the input have the same. The ID of the input is the same for of the label. So HTML knows that these two are connected. So let's save one more time and refresh. Excellent. It looks nice. Very simple. I like it. So what else could we need? We're going to have the email. We're going to have the class. We're going to have a date. So the class is going to be a dropdown. So here in our forms, we're going to choose this select, that is basically a dropdown. And we're going to copy this, all of this, and paste it inside another div. We could copy a div, a similar div as this. Remove these two things and paste what we had before. That is this select, right click, format document. Sometimes the format document won't work, so you need to do it manually, but it's a very good practice to always try to intend to the right so you can still see the hierarchy I was talking about. So we're going to remove this area label also. And here you can put the options. Let's say we have three courses: Google Sheets, Google Forms, and Google JavaScript. Here in value, we're also going to put the same: Google Sheets, Google Forms, and Google JavaScript. Because this was what is displayed, and this is what is sent once we're going to save it to our database or to Google Sheets. Okay, and we could change this to select your course. We could also put a label if we want. Let's see how this looks for now. I think there's no need for label, but you could do it exactly like this. You could put a label before the select. One thing we're not going to do today, but we could do in a further video, is to go and look for this in our sheet. Right now we're going to leave it these three courses, but it would be very nice if we had another sheet where we have the list of courses and it automatically will refresh our dropdown with the courses. This can be done, and we could do it in a separate video. For now, I'm more interested right now in the part of the date. So we're going to include a field for the date. So it could be very similar to this one. I'm going to copy this and paste it here after our select. And let's, well, one thing I forgot to do in my select is to put an ID. It's very important. ID, we're going to call it class or lesson or whatever, course. So we don't confuse it with this class. And finally, we're going, instead of email, we're going to create one called date. And here this will be also date. This shouldn't be called email address. Let's call it date. Actually, if we put here date as a type, then save and refresh. Now we have a very simple pop-up and we don't need jQuery or anything like that. At the beginning, I told you that this JavaScript is not very important, but actually it is. So without this JavaScript, some of these things might not work as smoothly. Perfect. So now the only thing missing is to be able to send this to our sheet here. Let's call this date. And now we're going to need our script. You could do it below this other script or create a new script tag before that one. So you can write script and then close it again with script, and we're going to do some coding, some JavaScript coding. What I want to do is that when I click the submit button, then we're going to send all this information to our JavaScript, and then we can see what we can do there to send it to Google Apps Script, and then Google Apps Script will send it to Google Sheets. This is more or less the process. For this, we're going to create a function. Our function could be called anything we like. For example, process form data. That's it. And there are a couple of ways we could do this. One way is to assign our process form data inside my form. So I could say here on submit, and so that we call that process form data when the form is submitted. So process form data. And inside the parentheses, I could put this. That is the form. For this to work, we need to add an additional thing to our input, and is a name. Other than the ID, we could use the same ID as a name. This is what will work when we work with forms. So just copy this for the email. Now for the course, instead of ID, let's call this name again. And down here, also copy ID date and paste to the side and change ID for name. And here we're going to put this as the form that is processing. And for now, what we could do is just console log the form to see that everything is working once we submit it. One additional thing we could do is that normally in the web pages, when something is submitted blank, the submit action normally goes to another web page. So you see that this is a behavior we don't want, but let's try it out. For now, let's save it. Let's refresh. We're going to put anything here. Let's select the course and select the date. Let's submit it. See that this is sent to another page. I didn't want that, so we can change this easily. For now, let's do F12 and we're going to our console, and here we have a form element. But now I need from that form the content. So for example, just to access the user email, it would be just form.user email. Let's see. Let's just submit the email here. Submit it. And here you can see that it's sending email object, but actually I just need the value. So we're going to say form.useremail.value. Last time. Submit it. And here it is. Okay. So it's very nice because I only need this form and I don't need, in other videos from me, you may see that I call first what is in the email, then I call in another variable what is in the dropdown, then I call in another what is in the date. The nice thing about doing it with this form is that I only need one thing, and then I could call internally. It's like I have a bag that is called form, and inside this bag I have the email and the class and the date and whatever else I would need. One thing missing is that I don't want this to go to a blank page. For this, there are a couple of ways we could do it. We could do this document dot. The bad thing about Google Apps Script with HTML is that it doesn't suggest anything. So a suggestion I always do, open an HTML editor or a code editor such as Visual Studio Code. So let's open it up very quickly. It's much faster to work with an editor like that. So I'm going to open Visual Studio Code, and I just copy all that I have here. So I do Control A, Control C or Command C, then I choose all of this here. I'm going to delete it or open a new file here, in File, New Text File, and then I'm going to paste everything. And the nice thing about an editor such as this is that when I hit the dot, I have a lot of options. So what I need here is to get an element by ID. What element am I going to get? I'm going to get the button. So you may imagine, or you may remember, that I didn't put an ID to my button. So it's important for me to put an ID to the button. So let's give this button the ID button to be very original. And in side quotations, I'll put button here. And then I'm going to add an event listener. I start writing event here, and I get the suggestion. Add event listener. I'm going to open a parenthesis, and then I'm going to hit what event do I want. I start writing the quotation marks, and I have here all the list of events. The one I need is going to be the click. There are a lot of events that could be, for example, if you are standing inside a button but are not clicking it, this hover over it. This is another event listener, for example. Here we're going to add a function, a very simple function that has an event here. You can see that you can write the event however you want, with an EV or just an E, as you can see it in many tutorials online. Then we're going to open a bracket, and here what I need is this e.prevent default. Basically what I'm saying to the button is, hey, if you are clicked, don't do what you were designed to do. That is to go to a blank page. That's it. All of this was just to do that. So as I did a lot of modifications, I'm going to Control A to select all, Control C. Then I'm going to Control A this again. So I delete it and paste it again. Let's save it and let's try it out. What I want is that if I click submit, it does not go anywhere. So let's try with an email and submit. Given that I did the prevent default, then I'm going to call my process data form from the same function, but I need to say somehow to say to the code, hey, send this form I'm in. This is why the hierarchy in HTML is very nice, because it's like this button is the child of this form. So I could say this dot parent, I think, and then let me see. Let's try it out here better, because this visual code knows better HTML than me. So this dot and parent node, and that's it. Parent node. Let's see, and let's try it again. And it's working again. And now I could remove this on submit, and it should continue to work. Okay, perfect. Now what I'm missing is I need to, in this process form data, what I need to do, I already have this form and I want to send this form to Google Apps Script. How do I do that? I do it with this command, google.script.run. This is basically a way of HTML to connect with this part, the Google Apps Script code. So how do I communicate via functions. So I'm going to create a function that processes the form data. Basically, in my case, what we're going to do is to append the data. So let's call this append data, and we're going to send our form. Let's go to our code and create the function append data with the form. Now we're going to create 3 variables, one for the email, one for the course, and one for the date. And we're going to call it from our form. So as you remember, in the HTML and the JavaScript, I called it, when we did the test, I call it with this form user email dot value. But given that when we send it, given that we are sending it out of our HTML to the Google Apps script with this Google script dot run, now we don't need this value. So we're just going to use this form dot user email. So it's form dot and the ID. User email for this case, for the email, ID course for the course, and ID date for the date. So we are just going to say form.email, form.course, and form.date. You actually don't need to create the variables because they're so easy and have the same name that maybe we don't need it. What we could do is just log them out to see that everything's working. Let's save, and let's, okay. See, let's go here to our executions. Let's refresh. Sometimes you need to refresh a couple of times or just refresh the entire script while it finishes logging everything up. Okay. So now you can see that we have Google Sheets and the date. I don't know why the email is not here. Let me see. This is form. Because this is not email. It's user email. But you get the idea, it works. Okay, now what I need to do, and we have done this much more in other videos, is just to append it and create a row. This is very, very easy. We're just going to first connect to the book, then to the sheet, and then directly append the row. So let's create this worksheet variable that will be spreadsheet up. Actually, maybe we don't need to do all the steps. Let's do spreadsheet up dot get active spreadsheet. This is connecting to our worksheet. Then get sheet by name, and here we're going to give it the name of our sheet, that in our case is data. And finally, we're going to do this append row, and append row receives, as you can see in the example, an array open and closed by square brackets. So we're going to open and close square brackets, and we're going to put 3 things: form dot user email, comma, form dot course, comma, form dot date. That's it. Let's save it, and I think it's going to work. Let's update. And given that now I'm connecting to Google Sheets, I need to have a new permission. So we're going to run any of these. We could run append data. So it asks for my permissions. Review the permissions. We hit in our account. We choose our account. We click in advanced and then go to untitled project. I should have given a name here. Let's click allow. For now, this doesn't matter. This is an error because this won't work when I execute it from the editor. It will only work when I am directly in my web app. So let's give a name to this, schedule web app, and rename it. And here we're going to update. And now let's try again. Submit. Let's go to our sheet, and here it is. Perfect. And you can see this is a date, because if I change the format of date to this, for example, it still works. Okay. So this is our first step. There are a lot of things going on that we need to change. For example, to give to be able to change this, so we can have only certain dates to, because this was the big problem in Google Forms, that we couldn't block some of the dates and some of the hours and all that. So let's see how can we do this. And for example, this is just a date, but I need also the hour. So how could we do that? This is for the second part. So right now it will only work, for example, for hotel reservations where we select a date. But the idea is that we could also choose the hour and much more. But this is the starting point for our web app. The only thing we are missing right now is maybe just a bit of cleanup and deploying again. Remember I told you that you should deploy just when you start to do all the testing, and then when you are ready and you have an app, then you will deploy it again so you can share your URL. So we're going to remove these loggers and maybe see if in the HTML I left something that I should delete. I don't think so. I'm going to save and we're going to deploy, to manage deployment. Here in this pencil edit, we're going to select in version, new version. And here we are going to execute as practical sheets because we don't need anything revolving accounts for now. And this is where you can choose if you are going to let only people with Google account be, it could be free accounts like practical@gmail.com or paid accounts in Workspace accounts, for example, your employees at yourcompany.com if you have subscribed the Workspace service with Google. Or maybe you want it to for anyone because maybe they have Outlook mails or maybe they can enter without having to have any account. So you could leave it as anyone. That's it. Let's click deploy. And we go to our URL. And finally, we're going to copy this and test it. So we're going to open up an incognito window. Here, just clicking Ctrl+Shift+N. And we're going to paste our URL here. And we're going to do a very simple test. 1@1.com. And let's select our course and choose a date. March 1st. Let's submit. Another thing we could do for a future video is to clean up this form so that once we submit it, as we did in the inventory web app, you can delete. So you can do a lot if it's a thing you want, okay? Or maybe put a message, a success message. You've been scheduled, something like that. So let's just check in our schedule if it was successful. So here it is the email and the 1st of March. There are a lot of things we could do to improve this. Mainly I think the main thing missing right now is that we could include an hour and somehow, as we did in our form scheduling system, how to be able to configure these hours and restrict that not in all dates and not in all hours we could work with this. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it with this date type in that HTML5 gives us, or maybe we're going to have to install a jQuery add-on for the JavaScript to be able to do this. So we have the two options and we will assess them in a future video. So I hope this will be useful. Thanks for watching. And if you would like to download the template, you can go to the Patreon page and easily download it. And if you have any questions regarding the code, you can ask me there. Thank you so much to my Patreons for making this possible. See you in the next video.